Welcome to this candidate forum. I am Mary O'Connor and am serving as moderator. We have 3 candidates running for the House of Representatives for the 1st Barnstable District. The 1st District includes all precincts in Dennis, all precincts in Brewster, and Yarmouth precincts 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 8. The forum is moderated by the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod Area and co-sponsored by the Cape Media Center and the Cape Cod Times. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization neither supporting nor opposing candidates. As your moderator for this event, let me be clear. I am not a resident of the 1st Barnstable District. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod Area and a resident of Eastham. Welcome to our 3 candidates. We have in alphabetical order, Christopher Flanagan on the Democratic ticket, Abe Kasparian Jr., running independently of any ticket, and Tracy Post, running on the Republican ticket. We also welcome Rich Eldrin, a reporter for the Cape Cod Times. Mr. Eldrin will help us with questioning the candidates. I'll start by reviewing some procedures for the event, which each candidate received and agreed to ahead of time. Any campaign materials such as palm cards, brochures, signs, and banners, including t-shirts, are to be kept outside the building. This helps to ensure the nonpartisan informational tone of the forum. Substitutes are not permitted, so luckily we have each of the candidates tonight and we can go forward. Civility at all times is the expected norm from the candidates and their campaigns. The League will provide a League member to serve as moderator, myself, and yes, I do live outside the 1st Barnstable District. Candidates, you will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes to respond to a question, and 2 minutes for a closing. There is no rebuttal, but you certainly may use any time remaining when you answer a question or in your closing statement to clarify a position. The order of speaking will be rotated. I'm using a random generated grid used by the League of Women Voters for 3 candidates. I will announce the order before each question. Timekeepers are being provided by the League, and they will be timing and holding signs to indicate when you need to think about wrapping up the 30-second warning. I will allow you to finish your sentence after the stop sign, but then we'll move on. Questions have been prepared in advance by the League of Women Voters of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod Times. Questions are also being gathered from tonight's audiences, and some sent them in prior to this forum. We'll have index cards available for anyone to write a question. League members will sort the questions to combine similar ones and to eliminate any that are not issue-oriented. I or Mr. Eldrin will read questions until it is time for closing remarks. Opening and closing statements will be done in the following order, which was determined by picking a number out of the hat. We're going to open with Ms. Post,
Yep.
followed by Mr. Flanagan, and then Mr. Kasparian. I'll go on to say the event is being recorded. It will be broadcast on a live stream feed via the Cape Media Center on Comcast Channel 98 and Channel 99, as well as www.capemedia.org via the menu item watch/listen. Ground rules for us all. Everyone should turn off cell phones and beeping watches now. Please treat all candidates fairly. Please remain quiet throughout the forum. No clapping, waving of hands, cheering, or calling out, unless you're home. You are welcome to clap for all candidates following their closing statements. No campaign literature or signs are allowed in this room. And please submit questions that are provided on the index cards. Questions must be addressed to all candidates and must apply to issues or qualifications for representative. Raise your hand if you would like another index card. Designees from the League of Women Voters will review the questions for legibility, clarity, and applicability to all candidates. I will pose as many questions as time allows. We might combine similar questions to be sure to cover a variety of topics within our time constraints. Candidates, you now have 2 minutes each for your opening statement. As I said, Ms. Post will go first, followed by Mr. Flanagan, and then Mr. Kasparian. Ms. Post.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening. My name is Tracy Post, and I'm a candidate for state representative for the 1st Barnstable District. That covers the towns of Yarmouth, Dennis, and Brewster. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and all the volunteers who helped put this debate together, as well as my fellow candidates for participating, folks watching at home, and media outlets here tonight for your attention to this important election. I'm in this race because the people of the 1st Barnstable District are experiencing high inflation, high fuel and energy costs, high grocery bills, just to name a few. People are struggling, and we need to elect a state representative that has the experience on making tough decisions during difficult times. I ask for your vote to make Cape Cod more affordable. I ask for your vote to keep Cape Cod safe. And I ask for your vote to bring balance and a strong Cape Cod voice to Beacon Hill. My 2 decades of experience on the municipal level best positions me to advocate for the people of the 1st Barnstable District. I care deeply about them. As you will hear tonight, we have significant issues that need to be addressed. We need to elect a person ready on day 1 for the hard work and actually get things done. In fact, 4 out of the 5 members of the Dennis Select Board, the 5th being one of my opponents, are all endorsing my candidacy because they feel that I am a proven, decisive, and effective leader. Both of my opponents have been on the record favoring big government, more taxation, which I oppose. For example, both of my opponents support ballot question 1, which is something that creates more taxes. In contrast, I support putting tax dollars back in the pockets and measures such as suspending the gas tax during these incredible, difficult times. Over the next hour, I hope you will see why I'm the best candidate for the job and why you should vote for Tracy Post in the November 8th election. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for giving myself and my fellow candidates the opportunity to share with you where we stand on the issues. My name is Chris Flanagan, and I'm the only candidate who's taking action on our local economy, our housing crisis, and our labor shortage. And I do this through being the executive officer of the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Cape Cod as their executive officer and a member of the Barnstable County Economic Development Council. I'm the only candidate with local and legislative experience, being a 2-term Dennis Select Board member, where I served as the chair for the last 3 years, and also having worked for 2 senators from Massachusetts. I'm the only candidate who has worked on climate and coastal resiliency, having worked for a U.S. Secretary of State and being a board member of the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative. I am running because, like many of you listening, my family and I have felt the impacts of our quality of life issues here on Cape Cod. Whether you're a parent like me who struggled to find childcare, or like my 73-year-old father who can't get a medical appointment in time for a medical appointment for his Parkinson's. Or like my wife and me, where owning a home to raise a family in and to grow in seems like a dream because we cannot compete in this market. And I would just like to address something that was said earlier about my fellow colleagues who I have a lot of respect for and really enjoy working with them. And I'm not surprised, given that for them, their political affiliations may not necessarily be aligned with my party. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kasparian.
Yes, thank you, Mary. And thank you for the Women's League of Voters for involving all of us to be able to get our message out and speak directly to the voters of the Brewster, Yarmouth, and Dennis first district of voters for this race as state representative. I live in in Yarmouth, Port Mass, and I work for a fairly large company, AutoZone. I'm a driver. I make a minimum wage, like most of the people do, about $15.50 an hour. One of the things I propose to help people in our community is to raise and eliminate the minimum wage, do away with the language of minimum wage and turn it into a living wage. The salary would start at $25 an hour, and it would, for those companies that exceed 75 employees. Those companies that have 75 and less, at least $19 an hour. Now, it's a piece of legislation that would have to be drafted. I've already drafted a piece of legislation. I've worked on legislation in 2 different counties. In Hampden County, I worked on legislation that was introduced by students, high school students, and was argued in, at the state capitol. So my time is short, and I have to move on. And I just want to ask you to consider me as an alternative to the Democrat and Republican side, as an independent candidate who can work both sides of the aisle very comfortably. Thank you. And I ask you for your vote.
Thank you. Now we move on to our question and answer segment. Mr. Eldred will present the first 2 questions. You will each have up to 2 minutes to respond to each question.
Thank you. The first question will be answered first by Mr. Kasparian, followed by Ms. Post and Mr. Flanagan. Affordable housing and maintaining a workforce on Cape Cod is a major issue. What would you do if elected to the legislature to address what many are calling a housing crisis and concurrent labor shortage?
That's a very good question, obviously. And the way I would look at it is what we've been doing in the town of Yarmouth. We've taken over land areas and built affordable housing. And that's what I would try to encourage the state legislature to fund, not only on Cape Cod, but we have to look at the entire state, because we are a family that operates as an entire state, and we have to look at the other areas throughout the state. So I would support legislation that would create an environment for growth in taking over properties, building them up, and partnering with companies. So it would be the government and companies coming together as a unit, as a team, as a partnership to create it. We would own maybe the land, and the companies would own the actual structures, and that's how we could handle housing across not only Cape Cod, but all of Massachusetts.
Thank you. Well, this is a critical issue to all of us living here, and as I've door knocked over the past many months, this is the one issue that has come time and time again to the forefront of the campaign. I've spent 7 years on the planning board prior to spending 12 years on the Board of Selectmen. So I've written bylaws that have been successfully passed at town meeting related to affordable housing, including inclusionary zoning and use of smaller lots for affordable, to name a couple. I served on the Affordable Housing Trust, which funds these type of projects, and I was involved in the conversion of underutilized hotels becoming workforce housing and creating a growth incentive zone so that these conversions were exempt from Cape Cod Commission review. One other piece to the affordable housing issue is quality year-round jobs. I feel that we are a service industry and a tourism industry, and sometimes with that doesn't come the high-paying jobs that we need. We need to bring some high-quality year-round jobs so that we can afford housing. As your next state representative, each of the towns, I understand, are significantly different from one another, and each of them has a housing production plan. And so to the extent possible, I want to meet with one of my first issues, orders of business upon being elected, will be to meet with each town and find out how I can bring their housing production plan forward and help them where the state is maybe an impediment to their success. So those are some of the ways that I would help affordable housing.
As the executive officer of the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Cape Cod, I work on housing policy day in and day out. A few issues that we are impacted by here on the Cape, one being a lack of a diversified housing stock, meaning that 80% of our housing stock here on Cape Cod is single family. And because of that, there are very few housing options, whether you're a senior and you're looking to downsize, or someone who's just starting out in their career and they're looking to either buy or rent something that they can afford. In Brewster, through my work, we built a house. The association built one house for one family in 1 week. And in Dennis, we actually changed our zoning to enable hotels to be repurposed into housing. And a success story that we've seen recently is the Pelham House, actually right down the street here, where they transformed an old hotel into all workforce housing for their employees. And for me, as your next state representative, I'm really going to focus on redevelopment. There's so little land left on Cape Cod to be developed for housing, and I really feel like that's the opportunity that Cape Cod and the Commonwealth has in order to solve this housing crisis, is through redevelopment, through repurposing old buildings, plazas, hotels. We've seen it all along Route 28 and 6A, and I really feel like that's the way out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Second question, and this will be answered first by Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Kasparian, and Ms. Post. Cape Cod is expected to spend $4 billion or more to deal with wastewater over the next few decades. The Cape Cod and the Islands Water Protection Trust Fund, which all towns contribute to, will cover some of the cost, but unpromised funds are dwindling. Is there anything the legislature can do to aid in this build-out that is needed to protect Cape Cod water quality?
It's a great question. So being on the Dennis Select Board, wastewater has really been something that we've been focusing on, and I certainly know that Yarmouth has as well, and Brewster is developing their own water quality plan. As your state representative, I'm really focused on bringing resources back to the district. And wastewater, as has been pointed out, is costly, but we can't afford not to do it. With homeowners, it's going to be really important that they have resources to be able to afford to tie into the wastewater infrastructure. And whether that's through the county, I understand that the county may be able to provide some resources, but I definitely think that the state representative, and hopefully me, would be the person to be able to deliver resources around this type of infrastructure. And not only just for wastewater, but also for water quality for ponds, particularly for alternative systems that remove phosphorus, so that not only our ocean waters, our drinking water, but also our pond waters are of the highest quality.
I think Chris, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I think Chris has covered a large portion of the things that I would emphasize on. But it's where is the money going to come from? And I think that we have to look at, instead of raising taxes, which is the normal thing to do, raise real estate taxes to offset the expenditures, that we have to look towards the federal government to lend assistance through their programs that they have available. Have that money flow from the federal government into the state government and earmarked for Cape Cod because of Cape Cod's needs for water quality. I don't see any problem in being able to draft a piece of legislation and work with our federal partners at the federal level through our federal representatives here in Massachusetts to gain consensus to have monies come back into Cape Cod for specific purposes as green concerns that we all have. And that's how I would look at trying to target the problem. Also, I would try to take and encourage our students that are either in college locally or who are in high school that might want to sit on a committee and help draft a piece of legislation, delve into it, look at it, put together something collectively, because it's the community they're going to inherit. So let's involve them. And that's what I would like to try to do, and pass that on to the federal government and beg for their assistance, I guess.
Well, thank you very much. This is an issue that we've been dealing with for decades in Yarmouth. So I'm acutely aware of the issue. We had a plan many years ago, probably about 10 years ago or so. And I think the educational piece was missing. We are a very tourism-based economy, so we have to build for the influx, which makes it a little bit more expensive. Originally, the town wanted to put the burden strictly on the taxes, and I voted against it. And it was a hard vote to do because I know it's something, clean water and our clean environment is extremely important to all of us and to the success of our future. However, when I was in the grocery store and I was talking to people, it was, 40% tax increase was the difference between some older persons living in their house or not. Ultimately, it failed the town meeting, and we took a little bit of a break. We spent a lot of time educating people, and we asked administration to come back with a plan that would not put it on the tax rolls. And that's exactly what we did. In the most recent year, we had our first phase of wastewater funded without increasing taxes. Now, as was mentioned before, direct connections will increase taxes, will cost money for the hookup, but that's a direct connection. What we were looking at previously was a 40% tax increase with no direct connection. So that was a little bit of a hard sell. But this is the type of person that I am. It's not, we don't always you can't take the easy way out, right? You have to take the smart way out. You have to think about it and find a way to do it. And I'm happy to say we did. I'm happy that the Cape Cod Water Collaborative was established and the funds for that we will all benefit from. But as been said here tonight, there's no way that we're going to be able to do it without state and federal funding. And I'm going to be knocking on that door every chance I get and beating the drum because we need their help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eldred. We move on to the next question, and the answer order for this question is Ms. Post, Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Kasparian. In the wake of continued mass shootings around the country, do you support changes in Massachusetts gun legislation? And if you do, would you please describe what changes you would support? Ms. Post.
Yeah, that's a deeply emotional thing. What's been happening around the country has been horrific. I feel like Massachusetts does a really good job with our gun laws. We've been very fortunate here. I think a lot of the issue really revolves around mental health. I think we need to do a better job with mental health, getting help to people. We've closed a lot of our hospitals. Also recognizing the signs of these people who are sick and hateful, really. Gun laws, I feel sometimes are a false sense of security in the sense that it's the law-abiding citizens What I feel the problem is in the heart, is in here, and that's what we need to work to fix. So I'm pretty proud of the gun laws that we have here in Massachusetts and the background checks that go along with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
Although we may have good gun laws in Massachusetts, I do believe that we all need to be mindful of the changing landscape of what weapons look like. And because of that, I do feel like we need to make sure that the gun laws that we have on the books continue to evolve to make sure that people are safe. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. As we send her to school, my wife and I are always going to have to worry about making sure that she's safe. And I think that in addition to having proper gun laws, we need to make sure that the school systems have the security that they need in order to provide a safe instructional environment.
Thank you. Mr. Kasparian.
As I try to, and I'll elaborate a little bit more, I want to involve students constantly. If I'm elected as state rep, I intend to have student committees, both at the college level and at the high school level, for students who want to become involved in politics and in government. Specifically, college students who want to go on to be lawyers, who really know how to draft a piece of legislation. They know how to write law because they study law. I want to involve them to create committees to look at the situations. And I want to have this as an ongoing committee throughout our community. So the students become involved and stay here locally and don't move away. So what are some of the things I'd like them to think about? I'd like them to take up the issue of guns. It's their age group. It's their families. They're the ones that are going to inherit Cape Cod as they get older, and they're going to be the ones that take care of us as we become seniors, more than I already am. So that's what I'd like to do, have their input, then draft legislation that really talks specifically to those individuals' needs and how it will affect them in their schools. I want to see more money spent in our local schools, in our high schools, to try to ascertain, as both candidates have said, to look at people who might have problems who need to be assisted. And so I think it comes down to spending a little bit more money, but also having a committees of students and getting students really involved in their own community.
Thank you. The next question, the order of answer will be Mr. Flanagan, Ms. Post, Mr. Kasparian. Do you support the Family and Work Mobility Act recently passed by the Massachusetts legislature? Why or why not? Mr. Flanagan.
You know, I do support the Mobility Act. I reviewed it months ago, and I do believe that it is something that's really going to benefit the people in the Commonwealth and also families.
Thank you. Ms. Post.
And just back to the last question, one thing I would fully support are resource officers in all schools. I think that's extremely important. To the question of the Family and Mobility Act, question number 4, which is your ballot question 4, no, I do not support that. The legislation was passed recently. It requires the Registry of Motor Vehicles to issue state credentials to people without the ability to verify their identity. They do not have the expertise to verify these documents from other countries. I personally think that some other form of identification may be appropriate for those driving here illegally, but to get the same privilege as a U.S. citizen is wrong. This could potentially lead to voting and identity fraud, and some may illegally register to vote as part of that license process. And this has the potential to change our entire electoral process, which is why I don't believe that our legislators should make such a law, and I'm glad that this initiative is on the ballot for the voters to have a say to overturn this. The text of the law says it allows Massachusetts residents who cannot provide proof of lawful presence in the United States a driver's license. This is a text that I personally cannot get past. There's a process to come here legally with verified documentation. That's a process that we should incentivize, and we have a failed immigration policy. And the other thing I want to say is I can't blame people for coming here. We have an amazing country. But we don't know at this point in time, without the verification of the documents being checked, who the good people are and the bad people are. And we have bad people coming here, and it's a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kasparian.
When we talk about allowing people to have driver's licenses, I have no problems with that. I think they have to have, because they're on our roads anyways. They drive illegally anyways. They don't have insurance on their vehicles anyways. How do I know that? I work for AutoZone. I see them come in repairing vehicles, and they do not have the proper paperwork to be operating the vehicle that's sitting out in our parking lot. How do we correct that? Let them come. If they're not a legal citizen, I have no problems with that. Let them come into the registry. Let's create a separate piece of license for them. As long as they pass a driving test, as long as they can pass the road test, as long as they have insurance on their vehicle, I don't mind, because that gives us all protection if they hit us, if they're not driving properly. So yes, they should have a license. It should be segregated so you don't get the right to vote. We do it on a separate form of license, but we give them the right to be able to drive, providing they pass the same test that we all pass the same driving test we all pass, buy the same insurance that is required by all of us. Now when they have a mistake or an incident that happens, the police can enforce, take away, and we know exactly who they are, where they live, and what their background is. I don't have a problem. I think they should have licenses. Thank you.
Thank you. The answers to the next question go in the order of Ms. Post, Mr. Kasparian, Mr. Flanagan. The question is, the Roe Act was passed by the Massachusetts legislature and overcame the governor's veto in 2020. If elected, will you protect the Roe Act from any attempts to limit or reverse it? Ms. Post.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm pro-choice, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court gave it back to the states. I'm proud that our governor protected our rights on the issue. The people of Massachusetts have spoken. I support a woman's right to choose, and I believe that there is no better person in government to be able to make a vote for a woman's body than another woman. This is a deeply personal issue for many, and many scenarios that occur that go into one's decision. I agree with Baker's position on this and cannot support late-term abortions or allow minors to get an abortion without parental or guardian consent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kasparian.
This is a very difficult and hard issue, especially for a man to talk to a woman and try to educate a woman on how she should manage and handle her own body and what transpires in the form of pregnancy. I certainly have thoughts on the subject. The thought is that abortion, if allowed, is only allowed for those rapes and incest and that type of pregnancy. I think also that if a woman is seeking an abortion, it's a medical condition. Has to be a medical component that would hurt that woman who is carrying that child. I think that's very important. I believe that life does start at conception. And when we terminate life at conception, that goes against God's rule. And it certainly goes against my feelings internally of how I think about that. But it also, for me as a man to dictate to a woman, that's a very, very difficult thing for any man to do. So I think that it has to be based on the individual woman's needs, but with some parameters set aside for certain issues that I've already indicated.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
This one's an easy one for me. I would wholeheartedly support and protect the Roe Act. For me, not only is a woman's right to choose important, but I was appalled by the Supreme Court decision. And I'm not quite sure how someone can be pro-choice and happy by the Supreme Court decision that was made. For me, I'd like to go back to the previous question, as I didn't get a chance to offer an explanation as to why I supported it. For the Family Mobility Act, it's important that people undergo training and show some level of competency and an understanding of our laws, our driving laws here in Massachusetts. It is a public safety issue. It protects people not only on the road, but also protects people should they get into an accident, because if that person has a license, they will be able to have access to insurance. And I think that that's vitally important. I believe for me, it's a matter of public safety, and people should not only abide by the law, even if they are not here lawfully, and have an understanding of our laws. Thank you.
Thank you. The answer order for the next question is Mr. Kasparian, Mr. Flanagan, and Ms. Post. Holtec LLC, the Camden, New Jersey-based company decommissioning the Pilgrim Nuclear Station, is planning to dump 1 million gallons of radioactive contaminated water into Cape Cod Bay. How do you see the state's role in preventing Holtec's action and protecting the bay's environment? Mr. Kasparian.
It's an outrage to talk about dumping that kind of waste into our system. That's simple, cut. There's no second guessing it. That has to not take place. And the government and the state legislature have to pass laws and go to the federal government to ensure that that doesn't happen. It just can't happen. You just don't do it. You're going to have to figure out some other way of disposing your waste and not dumping it into the Bay of Cape Cod. One of the most precious places on the planet Earth is Cape Cod. So that is my short answer to a very difficult question. It ain't going to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
So I know that myself, including our community, is outraged the fact that we even have to have this conversation. The Dennis Select Board sent a letter basically outlining our outrage and explaining that they need to stop. The state government's role, in addition to the legislature, in my mind, this is really the role for the Attorney General's office to do follow-up and make sure that they don't do anything unlawfully, and to help navigate the process in which the people can actually prevent this from happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it is an outrage. I agree with what's been said. It's awful. As soon as I had heard this, I was on the phone with Mr. Gottlieb from the Association to Protect Cape Cod, which then crafted a letter that each of the municipalities could send in a strong opposition to such a tragedy to our environment. So I was also part of the Cape and Island Selectmen and Councilors Association, which is a really great group of leaders across the Cape that had a discussion on it. And there was a lot of discussion there about all the potential legislation that could happen, including fining. But the fact that a federal agency would permit this in some type of permit is what really needs to be changed. And we need to use every ounce of political power at every level to make sure that that happens, that the change happens, so that they are never allowed to dump any nuclear waste into the bay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for just one more question in order to give the candidates time to make their closing remarks. So the answer order for this question will be Mr. Kasparian, Ms. Post, and Mr. Flanagan. If elected, would you be in favor of changes to the State House of Representative rules to make each legislator's vote in that body's legislative committees publicly available and reported on the state legislature's website? Mr. Kasparian.
I don't see why it isn't now. It's such an obvious answer. Yes, it should be public. One of the biggest things that I want to do is make sure that, and I've said it a number of times and I'll state it again, I want to have students throughout the Commonwealth review every single piece of legislation that is produced and come up with pros and cons, debate it, and suggest it to the individual legislators whether or not it should be passed. I know 5 legislators here on Cape Cod. I've talked to 2 of them. 2 of them have said, Abe, we don't have the time to read every bill we have to vote on. We rely on the party to assist us. Excuse me? You're relying on the Democratic or the Republican Party to help you make a decision on what is to be passed? You're not reading the bills? We don't have time. So I devised a plan. There will be time. I did this in Hampden County when I was Hampden County Commissioner, and I expect to do that at the state level and involve college students and high school students who want to move on. What I did in Hampden County, one of the women that worked there, who was one of the high school students who was graduating, is now an international lawyer. She went to Georgetown University. It was a small group of students, and we created a very nice way of dealing with issues such as this. And that's what I want to see done at the state capitol. This should not happen.
Thank you. Ms. Post.
Thank you very much. So serving 12 years on the Yarmouth Board of Selectmen, we have rules. We have open meeting laws. We have a lot of rules that we have to follow, and nothing's more infuriating than those that make the rules for other and exempt themselves from it. So to the extent possible, I believe that all of those votes should be public. I think it's important for transparency, and people need to have faith in their government, that their government is working for them. And when I vote to elect somebody, I want to know what their positions are on something, and I think that it should be reported.
Thank you.
Hear, hear.
And Mr. Flanagan.
So transparency is really important for me, and I believe it's vital for any form of government. When I was the chair of the Dennis Select Board, I made sure that we actually published our board packet so that the public had access to the information that select board members had. Also, in the spirit of transparency, I made sure that not only that I had a town email address that I use all of my correspondence with any select board related work, but that my colleagues also had a Town of Dennis email, so that all of the correspondences were the property of the Town of Dennis and could be easily findable should there be a records request. As it relates to the legislature, for me, as I vote on anything, as your state representative, I want that to be public. I want you to know where I stand. And I will always communicate how I vote and why I voted. And certainly as it relates to transparency in the legislature, that's something that I will work on.
Thank you. And you've also created just enough time for one more question. And the order for this question's answers will be Mr. Flanagan, Mr. Kasparian, Ms. Post. In your professional life, what accomplishment are you most proud? Mr. Flanagan.
It's a great question. And so for me, most recently, we had our residential construction career day where we brought in high school students from across Cape Cod and the islands, and we linked them with potential employers in the construction and skilled trades. Workforce development is a big issue, not just in the building and skilled trades, but also in every sector on the Cape. And for me, it was so great to see not only the students interacting with the employers, but for them to sign up to get a job shadowing program, an apprenticeship, a part-time job or a full-time job. And so for me, that has been one of the greatest accomplishments that I've experienced professionally, because I played a small part in a student's development and and being able to see them and be a part of their journey to a pathway, a career pathway, that whether they go on to college or they stay on the Cape, they have access to a job that enables them to live here full-time that pays good wages. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kasparian.
Yeah. As I spoke a number of times, I guess I'm going to have to finish with the same theory, or the same theme, and that is high school students who are graduating in their senior classes and college students who are going on with their lives in their specific training. And I want to see those students tear apart, review every bill. I want to put together committees on different schools to involve the students. I want to see the gal that graduated out of Georgetown University and then went on to Georgetown University and got her doctorate in law and is now an international lawyer out of Washington, D.C. I want to see that not only happen one time, I want to see it magnified many, many times throughout the Commonwealth of Mass. I think that if we involve our students in our discussions as we create pieces of legislation, how their community is run, if they really buy into what we do as adults, then we are going to be the benefactors of their accomplishments and their goals as we move forward. And we're going to learn a lot from them, and they're going to learn a lot from us. And I think that's my greatest advancement that I've had the pleasure to do as an elected official of Hampden County.
Thank you. Ms. Post.
Well, I've had the great fortune of working for two family construction businesses here on Cape Cod for over 20 years. And while I feel like there was probably a lot of great moments there, I don't care to share their private business in public. So my greatest accomplishment personally is my son, who's here with me tonight, and I'm forever proud of that. He has been part of my journey in public service since as long as he can remember. But I would probably say many years ago, before I had my son living over in Germany, I worked on the military base, and I worked for a shopette in a training area. And I was able to provide a very needed service to the military members in their training. And while it may seem simplistic, these trainees and these service members were very, very grateful to have the products that we were able to provide to them, if it's in the middle of the night after they've been out training for many, many weeks, and you know, you go in, you open the store for them so that they can get their necessities in a very short window. And I think that that's probably something that's been was always very rewarding.
Thank you. We'll now move on to closing statements. You each have up to 2 minutes, and Mr. Kasparian will go first, followed by Mr. Flanagan, and closing with Ms. Post. Mr. Kasparian.
Thank you very much for inviting us all. Thank you very much for putting up with our boring speeches, I'm sure at times. I really appreciate it. The only thing that I can offer and say to you is that I will work hard. I work tirelessly at my current job. I work tirelessly as a Hampden County Commissioner. I brought many changes to that body. I brought students into government, and I watched them flourish. That's what I want to repeat as a state representative. I want to make sure that our community, which is now my community as well, Cape Cod, is strong, stable, and has a good backbone with our students leading the charge. And that's why I hope that you will consider me. I'm an independent. I am not bound by either party or their rules or their regulations or any of their requirements to be a member of that party. I'm independent. I'll be able to look at both sides of an issue from the Republicans and the Democrats and be able to make a decision that works for all of us, we the people. So I ask you for your vote on November 8th. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight. I very much enjoyed the engagement.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
Thank you, League of Women Voters, and thank you to my fellow candidates for joining me this evening. With your support as your next state representative, I'll use my local and legislative experience to address our quality of life issues and to continue to deliver resources back to the residents of Brewster, Dennis, and Yarmouth. Unlike my competitor in this race who feels the need to take out radio ads to say things that are misleading or untrue, my campaign is focused on issues and how I plan to help you, regardless of your party affiliation, and to make sure, and regardless of your party affiliation. You have heard from all the candidates tonight, and we've all made good points. But the real question that you all need to ask yourselves as you cast your vote is, who is going to be able to deliver for you? Not only do I have a long history of public service, I've dedicated my life to it. And in addition to that, I have relationships with legislators both on the Cape and off the Cape, which is going to be really critical for getting deals done on Beacon Hill. I've built consensus of both sides of the aisle to get pieces of legislation over the finish line, and also here locally. I was in a meeting with our potential next lieutenant governor with industry leaders in Yarmouth yesterday, and it was clear that the issues facing us today, we need someone who will be able to get the job done like me. As your next state representative, you can count on me to expand services for seniors, for veterans, for mental health, addiction prevention, and rehabilitation. This is a critical time to protect a woman's right to choose. As someone who works on housing policy every day, we've heard throughout this conversation how important housing is. And to be able to develop housing and more rentals is a big focus of mine.
Thank you.
And I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you very much.
Ms. Post.
Thank you. It's been my honor to participate tonight and hopefully earn the vote and support of the great people of this district. I have worked hard throughout this campaign, and I will continue to do so when elected as your next state representative, which requires someone that has experience and commitment to get the job done. Yarmouth residents elected me 4 times to the board because they knew I loved my town, the job of public service, and have always been fully prepared for meetings with a great understanding of the subject matter. They knew I was visible in the community always, not just for a campaign. This is the type of leadership that we need for the people of Yarmouth, Dennis, and Brewster. I was raised here on Cape Cod. I was educated here. I have raised and educated my son here in the district. But if we don't make housing more affordable, we will continue to lose our greatest resources, our young families, our seniors, and many others. How will our communities and our businesses thrive without proven leadership to address these critical issues? They won't. We need more balance in government and need to work together to get things done for the district. I am proud to say that I have earned the endorsement of State Representative Tim Whalen and Governor Charlie Baker because they know my ability to produce and get things done. So I ask you for your vote in the November 8th election. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for deciding to run and giving voters the opportunity to learn more about your positions. Thank you to the Cape Media Center and the Cape Cod Times for jointly sponsoring and broadcasting this forum. Get out and vote. You may register to vote by October 29th to be able to vote in this election. Voters, early voting runs from October 22 to November 4. Election day is November 8th. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Election Day. Applications for mail-in ballots must be received by your town clerk by 5 p.m. on November 1st. Remember, this event will be rebroadcast several times before the election, and a recording will be available at www.capecodmedia.org and through a link at www.lwvcapecod.org. Thank you very much.